Okay. Hi there. Today is the 21st of August. Um, I'm Paul Glumaz with Lyndon LaRouche's political movement. And uh, we have quite a situation. And tonight I'm going to focus on the economic and financial warfare that is going on. That's one of the focuses. And the second focus will be on the internal war that's going on in the United States. Now, before I get started, I want to absolutely recommend a movie you can get on the internet. You have to pay a few dollars, but it is a million times worth it for your understanding. It's a movie called Britain's Second Empire, uh, The Spiderweb. Okay, it's a must. You just Google uh, Spiderweb or Britain's Second Empire, and watch the movie. It's about an hour and 17 minutes. It is the only coherent, fully clear exposition and explanation of understanding the British Second Empire. And it goes into how the British set up the offshore dollar system. So we're dealing not with a US dollar, but we're dealing with something called a City of London dollar. It's their dollar. It's not a US dollar. Okay, and it's absolutely crucial that people watch this movie. Because once you watch this movie, and everything that's in the movie I've known, basically known, but it puts it together very well. And if you watch this movie, you understand how this empire, as it was going under in the early 1950s, resurrected itself as a financial empire. And one of the things it used were secrecy places, places where you could do financing in secrecy. And used the last remnants of the empire, which were these islands, these overseas territories, which still exist, as like the Cayman Islands and Bermuda and the Virgin Islands and other islands like that, as the tax havens connected to the City of London. And they set up the legal and financial and accounting system. They set it up where nobody talks about it. Everybody knows what it is, but nobody talks about it. But it is, by 1980, this system had $500 billion in it. By 1988, it had $4.8 trillion. Today, it has $50 trillion of assets, of credit, of management. And the way this works is all the multinationals have their headquarters in these offshore places or in the City of London. All the banks, major banks, have them there. And 90% by 1997, 90% of all international financing was being done through this network. Okay, so this is the power you're dealing with. And the movie goes into how London became financialized, and essentially the financial industry became the major industry, and how this impacted the ability to have economic development. Now, in order to maintain this system, you want to prevent the credit from being used, money that's created by nations from being used in their own development, but you want to convince the local people, the relatively wealthy people, to send their funds into the tax havens to avoid taxation, to avoid national sovereignty. So this whole system is outside of any government, outside of any, run by the City of London, which is outside of the British government. It's not under any judicial control of the Parliament. The City of London itself, the financial center, is not under parliamentary control. It's outside of Parliament. And this is the system. It's non-national. It's above nations. And everybody who has money puts their money outside the nations into these areas of secrecy, secrecy destinations. And it's from there. They're called secrecy jurisdictions, I should say. Actually, that's the correct term. Secrecy jurisdictions. They're able to not only escape taxes, but you also have to pay a serious fee to the lawyers and the accountants that set these companies up, to set these trusts. So they operate through something called trusts, which is a very complicated system. You set up a trust, the owner may be somewhere else, but none of this is legitimate. This is how organized crime operates. This is how the drug trade operates. This is how arms sales operates. This is how terrorist financing operates. This is, and they do an incredible job. This movie, and I encourage everyone to watch it. Now, I'm saying this because you have to understand what this is, what this offshore dollar, what this offshore financial system is, in order to understand the financial warfare which is going on. Okay. What is happening is you had dollars being created by the Federal Reserve and pumped into the system at very low, at almost zero interest rates. In other words, the banks were on Federal Reserve life support, and they were getting dollars for close to zero interest rates. And then they would find ways to speculate. And one of those ways would be to loan money to corporations at somewhat higher interest rates so that they could buy back their stock to prop up the stock market. And that would be one way to sustain the system, by having a high stock value, or your stock index is very high, and that's a measure of wealth. Another way that you would make money is speculating on currencies and speculating on commodities. But one of the key ways to make money had been what's called the emerging market carry trade. Now, emerging markets are the countries that are primarily third world countries, but which are significant, like Turkey, Indonesia, Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, India. These are significant countries. And the idea is that those countries, not necessarily India, but those countries would essentially, you could lend to those countries, lend to their governments, for instance, buy their government bonds, buy the bonds of these governments at much higher interest rates. And as long as the dollar is relative, the return on dollar investments is relatively low, then you have essentially a profit to be made in the emerging market off these governments. Now, all these bonds have essentially guarantees. They are guaranteed by the states involved. And what happens? What's been happening is these countries like Turkey, Argentina, Brazil, Indonesia, South Africa, they are all being drawn into the global economic development perspective of the Belt and Road Initiative. There's the Maritime Belt and Road, there's the Land Belt and Roads, there's the African side of the Belt and Road, there's the Latin American side of the Belt and Road, and that system is totally different. It will tend to take money out of the offshore system to be used to be invested in these development projects. So the Chinese are creating a lot of credit, but that credit goes into these development projects. But then again, if you have a viable development project going on, the locals will tend to want to be part of it, invest their money in the local situation, and not have capital flight out of the country into the offshore tax havens. So by its nature, the Belt and Road is implicitly an attack on the whole system of control by people, by capital flight leaving the country. For instance, Africa, which you think is a net debtor nation, had $1 trillion of capital flight out of Africa, far greater than the debt that Africa has. So Africa has been a net credit supplier to the offshore system than they ever got from official debt or official credit from the system. And that's how it works in all these third world countries. You end up having a net outflow of capital far greater than the amount of capital going in, which becomes government debt or becomes some kind of debt. So this is a massive looting operation that's been going on for a long time. But right now it's become very critical because these countries are all shifting out of this system, or trying to shift out of the system into actual development perspective, and China's leading the way. So what's happened is that a decision was made, and this was also related to the U.S. situation. A decision was made to have the Federal Reserve begin raising the interest rates. And so the Federal Reserve has been raising the interest rates. And even though this interest rate rises may not seem to be a lot, they have nonetheless been enough to trigger, with the help of the hedge funds, to trigger a massive depreciation of currencies and to trigger a massive capital flight out of these countries into Europe and the United States. Now that props up the United States, it props up the financial system in Europe and the United States, but it also brings those countries into a financial crisis. Turkey's currency has been devalued over 40%. So has Argentina's. The ruble has been devalued almost 20%. The Chinese yuan has been devalued 10%. India's has been devalued 10%. Indonesia 10%. Brazil 20%. Now, at a certain point, these countries cannot pay these debts that they incurred because they're hemorrhaging. They can't get the means to pay these debts. So then you're facing a sovereign default. And you can't, this is what happened to Greece. You faced a sovereign default. Turkey is facing a sovereign default. Other countries could face a sovereign default. And that's when, traditionally, the bankers and the IMF move in and say, we'll bail you out, like they're saying to Argentina, we'll bail you out, which is what they've been doing. But on the price, on a condition that you shut down your development policy, and you shut down and you cut the wages, and you cut the living standards, and so forth and so on. This is how it works. Okay? Now, one of the guy who was very key, who designed this whole system of emerging markets, his name is Jim O'Neill. He was made a baron, or Baron O'Neill of something or other. And he was the guy who at one time managed all the assets of Goldman Sachs. He was also in the British government. He was also the one who coined the term the BRICS, the BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, as emerging markets which are where you could do business and loot. Anyhow, he had an article which was circulated where he says the following. He says Turkey, Erdogan, misbehaves basically through his nationalist efforts to have economic development. And now the markets are essentially going to punish him. As he's saying, we're punishing Turkey for its development, but also because Turkey is breaking out of the system. Turkey wants to join the BRICS. Erdogan was at the BRICS summit in Johannesburg. Turkey is also the key nation in the Belt and Road. Erdogan, who was tipped off by the Russians, defeated a coup and consolidated power. for all his problems, Erdogan wants economic development for Turkey and is coming much closer to Russia and China. So Turkey is being punished. At the same time, Iran is being used in the same way. The whole idea of the sanctions on Iran has nothing to do with any threat that Iran represents. It's a wedge to prevent Iran from participating. It's a wedge against Iran. And what they're doing is they're saying, and this is probably not Trump per se. Trump is allowing this to happen. What they're saying is that anyone who trades with Iran after a certain point will also get sanctions. But what are these sanctions about? They're about creating the conditions of financial and economic turbulence in these parts of the world. Russia is the British Foreign Secretary who replaced what's his name? Anyhow, came to the United States today and is talking about getting the U.S. to increase the sanctions on Russia over the phony Skripal affair. Why do they want sanctions on Russia? Because this is economic warfare. Now, what's going on is that there's now discussion going on, and it was being discussed in Johannesburg at the BRICS Summit. It's being discussed by Glumaz publicly that the Chinese and the Russians are working on a way of going around the system, going around the London-based dollar, and conducting business in their own currencies, conducting business in their own currency. The problem with that is it's bilateral. It's not multilateral. You don't have a universal means of exchange. You have essentially bilateral agreements. However, the Belt and Road and its bilateral development is setting the conditions, especially where Africa is concerned, for a new financial architecture. And that new financial architecture has to be one of fixed currency relationships, because that stops the speculation. Because what's the problem? Speculation is the enemy of investment and development. You have investment in speculation, you have the investment in development. So this is the other side of this war. So these now, but also if you start getting these sovereign defaults and you can't come up with the rescue package because Turkey is Turkey and they're telling you to go screw yourself, then you also threaten to blow out the entire financial system. But on the other hand, if you go back to quantitative easing instead of tightening things up, then you also have that problem of increasing debt, of increasing financial speculation, and so forth and so on. So this is a huge crisis that's now taking shape. But this is the main means of economic warfare against the Belt and Road, is precisely this creating a capital flight out of these countries, and this was done to Latin America and other countries in the early 80s. When Volcker, in the late 70s and early 80s, Volcker raised the interest rates to 20% or whatever, and it caused a massive capital drain out of these developing countries. It shut down their development. It's the same principle. And then you had so-called Asian flu in 97, 98, 99, which was the same, similar. It was an attack on all the currencies to create a crisis in these countries, and they did. South Korea had a crisis. Indonesia had a crisis. Malaysia made their currency non-convertible because Mahathir was following what we were saying, what LaRouche was saying. By the way, he's back in the prime ministership at the age of 91. And he was in China, and he's now bringing Malaysia into the Belt and Road. But this is the kind of thing that causes massive damage, causes governments to be overthrown, causes people to starve, people to crush the hopes that people have. You have a country that's developing, and then they just pull the rug out from underneath. This is what the City of London system does. And right now, they're terrified because barring a nuclear war, barring the ability to go to nuclear war, barring the ability to threaten nuclear war, you cannot stop the Belt and Road. You cannot stop the emergence of a new system. And so I bring you to the battle that's going on inside the United States, which is huge. And I believe you haven't seen anything yet. I think it's just getting started. Okay. Today was a big day on Manafort's conviction, and Cohen, and the media is just going berserk. But what's actually going on is that Brennan, who got his clearance taken away, this is very important because the security clearance is your ticket to the community, and having your security clearance removed is the equivalent of excommunication from the intelligence community or from lucrative jobs in the private sector. Because what you do, like take someone like James Comey, he went from being in the government, he went to being a top board of directors of the largest drug money laundering bank, Hong Kong Shanghai Bank. So he was on the international board of directors, making whatever millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then he brought in to run the FBI. So the guy who's helping Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, but this is how they do it. This is and who are they working for? They're working for the London-based dollar system and the offshore system with its trillions and $50 trillion worth of people's money. Right? That's where the action is. That's where the FBI is. That's where the CIA is. You retire from the CIA, you go work for Hong Kong Shanghai Bank. You go work for Bank of America. You go work as a consultant and what? Doing intelligence, doing the same thing you did with the CIA, but you're doing it for a private sector. So this is what Trump is going after. Now, what's going on, and this is coming from Giuliani, that they're telling Mueller that Mueller has to have his case wrapped up, 60 days before the elections. He's been doing this for a long time. He's got to wrap it up because the elections, you can't be doing this stuff in the middle of an election. However, if he were to wrap it up and there ain't nothing there, then that's a huge blow to the power establishment. So I don't think he's going to do that. I think he's going to escalate. I think he's going to escalate with more incredible crap in the media, just drowning the population in more incredible, this person and that person and this person knew this person who had this person who did sex with this person, and it's just they're gonna kill the population with this stuff. And so what the Trump crowd is threatening to do, if this thing is not wrapped up, they're threatening to have Donald Trump declassify all these emails. So you get at what's really going on. And what was really going on is that the quarterback of the whole operation for the FISA warrants coordinated was the CIA. The CIA is not supposed to be coordinating that kind of thing. So the CIA, Brennan was coordinating it with the British directly. And the fourth key person, Bruce Orr, maintained a relationship with Christopher Steele long after Christopher Steele, and was actually doing the back channel between Christopher Steele, British intelligence, and the FBI and the CIA. So all of this can come out. So this is just the beginning of the war. You're not seeing anything yet. And then if that happens and that comes out, then you're going to get an even bigger blowback against Trump. And this is all going into the midterm elections. Now, I've been out on the street this last week, and what I'm noticing is a very interesting phenomenon. A significant minority of people are identifying with Donald Trump far more than they are identifying with any issues or with any party. So you have all these people who are not beholden to the parties, right? And they're going to all vote Republican because Donald Trump is telling them to vote Republican. And in the Republican primaries, they're voting for the candidates that Trump is showing favoritism towards. So So this is very significant. I have not seen anything like this since Kennedy, since FDR. A little bit of this was Ronald Reagan, a little bit of it with Clinton. But this is very significant. You have a significant minority identifying with Trump against the fight, against the institutions. And as this thing intensifies, those people will, identification will intensify, and their political education will increase. Okay. So it's in this context that this film is very important, and our movement is very important in getting out the need for a four-power agreement. So we have a petition circulating now calling upon Trump, Modi, Putin, and Xi to convene a conference to establish a new fixed exchange system, a new Bretton Woods. So this is where we're at. This is the beginning of a new monetary system. It's already there in a latent form as a reaction to this economic and financial warfare that I described. So this is where we're at.